This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
One single word that describes the most prominent reason people subscribe to religion, and that word is fear. We'll explain right now here on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. That's right, it's the voice of atheism in Florida on the Tan Talk Network. Our Atheists of Florida website is, of course, Atheists of Florida.org or talk.aof.ngo. And your chance to insult an atheist for only $2. If you call in today at 441-3000, we'll even give you a get out of hell free card. It's transferable and could come in handy just in case Jim is wrong. Ed Golly.
No, I have to say, Ed, that this Jim here, that I'm running a special today.
Ooh,
you can call up and insult me for free.
Nice.
Just ask for me,
Okay.
and I'm perfectly willing to give you all the attention you deserve.
There anyone locally, if you'd like to come down here and insult Jim for free, the studio is right on North Myrtle. You're more than welcome to come in and shout to the glass.
Please keep your pitchforks and shotguns at
Yes,
home, please.
don't bring any.
There are some restrictions to the offer.
Torches are okay. It's cold outside, so we could use a torch or two.
But the station won't like it.
No packages that are ticking, please. Okay, so it's Ed Golly along with Jim Peterson, Joe Reinhardt in the Tan Talk studio. Lady Gaga weighed in on the nation's current state of affairs during her Enigma show in Las Vegas on Saturday. You may have seen that. She joined an ever-growing list of celebrities to voice their disapproval of, well, what do you think, the Trump administration. So Gaga singled out Vice President Mike Pence, slamming him for thinking it's acceptable that his wife works at a school that bans LGBTQ. So here's the deal. The vice president has defended his wife Karen's decision to teach at a place called the Emmanuel Christian School, which bans LGBT employees.
Can you spell that out, Ed?
And families. Emmanuel?
No, that LGBTQ. Well, what does that mean?
Lesbian, gay, bisexual,
transgender,
and queer. I don't know.
Questioning.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyway, the school bans their employees, students, and families of that gender. In an interview with Eternal World Television Network, Mike Pence likened the uproar over his wife's decision to an attack on Christianity, right? Because we don't have Bill O'Reilly around to instigate the attack on Christmas every year. So now we've got this. Well, here's what Gaga said. You are wrong. She said, and this is her quote, "You said we should not discriminate against Christianity. You are the worst representation of what it means to be a Christian. I am a Christian woman. And what I do know about Christianity is that we bear no prejudice and everybody is welcome. So you can take all that disgrace, Mr. Pence, and you can look yourself in the mirror and you will find it right there." Now, it occurs to me that Gaga isn't too familiar with her own religion if she's a Christian. She's probably what we'd call a cafeteria Christian, because while she may think Christianity is welcome, I think they welcome all denominations, but they prefer 20s and 50s. But of course, Christianity is as discriminating as any religion in the world, and that is, in our opinion, fully discriminating. Joe.
The Bible tells us to non-believers not to welcome them at your house, to send them on their way, and don't even wish them Godspeed. Just get rid of them. So the fact is that Gaga, like every believer, is a cafeteria Christian. They pick those things that appeal to them, that they think ought to be in the Bible or are in the Bible, and they ignore those things that are, well, atrocities or that fly in the face of good sense or fly in the face of a good conscience. So her idea that Pence is wrong about Christianity is wrong. The fact of the matter is that Pence is a much better Christian.
He's a model Christian.
He adheres much more closely to the teachings of the Bible, which is God's direct instructions on how to live our lives, than Lady Gaga. On the other hand, conversely, Lady Gaga is a much better person for having selected those parts of the Bible that make her a better human being, less judgmental and less likely to persecute or to bully particular sections of the population.
I think that's exactly right, Joe. What the entertainer is describing is a progressive, tolerant, open, and loving attitude toward all members of the human community. It does not grow out of religion and is not restricted to any religion. It arises naturally with the experience of growing up with connections to the many possibilities of the human community. And I think that's what we have to understand, among other things around this, is that while the Christian church tries to stay, and all religions basically try to stay stuck in the past, but in general, human culture is moving forward. And there's a kind of a glue that everybody is trying to escape, especially progressively minded people. Like, I assume that I'm not a fan of Gaga, but I assume that that's what she's trying to do. And she doesn't realize that there are aspects of what she thinks of as Christianity that aren't.
Well, in fact, I would have to say that her views more reflect the views of most atheists that I know, as opposed to most Christians. Atheism is all about inclusion, simply because we don't accept any deities or supernatural beings, and that includes an awful lot of things. But our particular organization is dedicated to the idea of equality. We do things like the Gay Pride and reading festivals and things of that nature, in order to spread the idea of equality for everyone, religious or not religious, equality for everyone before the law, which is the American ideal, which is one of the reasons that I'm proud to be an atheist.
Exactly. The American ideal as expressed in the Constitution, opposite of what's expressed in the Bible. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But the whole point is, she doesn't need Christianity to be a person who accepts all people in the culture. She only thinks she does. She's been misled and duped and conned into thinking that Christianity is the foundation of the person who she really is. But it isn't. She doesn't need it at all. So why does she subscribe to Christianity? Probably the same kind of fears that a lot of Christians have, that we'll talk about that shortly too, because I think you guys still have other things you want to say about all this before we get.
Undoubtedly she was brought up as a Christian, as so many people are, because so many parents think that to nominally instill some sense of morality and ethics into children, you need to bring them to a church somewhere. But of course, that's not really true.
And isn't the other word for all of that is fear, right? The fear of going to hell, the fear of a God unleashing some kind of wrath on you because you didn't obey his directives, because you aren't a good person, because you want to go out and hold up a liquor store, is what keeps people subscribing to these ideas and promoting them. It'll keep people in line. It's like fearing Santa Claus isn't going to bring you a toy, right? If you dip your sisters.
Well, I think the idea that appealing to the idea of inclusiveness doesn't require any sort of religious belief at all. And it is far more a humanist idea than it is a religious idea. But it does illustrate the idea that you need to be in some ways afraid of the consequences of not believing, because when Gaga criticizes Pence, she does it as a fellow believer. And so when someone says, well, you know, I agree with you about this, that, or the other, but I want to disagree with you, it tends to have, on this point, it tends to have a lot more weight than someone who says, well, I don't agree with you about anything. In fact, I'm not even a believer. So if I criticize Pence, which I am prone to do, only because he deserves it, it probably doesn't have as much weight as when Lady Gaga criticizes him, or if the Pope were to take it upon himself to do that, or someone. I think Pence is a Catholic, so an evangelical Catholic, whatever that is.
Yeah, more evangelical, I think. Yeah, I think
nevertheless, if the Pope were to criticize him for expressing that sort of opinion, imagine the weight that would have. I'm waiting to hear from him.
Sure, because if we actually read the Bible and go to Leviticus, it says, and I'm quoting, if a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. So according to Christianity, homosexuality is a capital crime.
And they should be executed, but it's their fault that you had to stone them to death.
It's just too much exercise.
So clearly Gaga doesn't know what the hell is in the Bible.
Or otherwise smite them.
And as long as we're reading from the Bible, here's another one from Leviticus. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. So as I interpret that very clearly, if Trump had committed adultery with a married woman, it would be a capital crime. But since neither Daniels nor the bunny apparently were married,
so far as we know,
he gets a clean ride on that one, right?
I fail.
Are you kidding me?
I fail to see what difference it makes whether you commit adultery with the man who lives next door with his wife, or whether you commit adultery with some woman that lives in another town or down the street.
Yeah.
It's still adultery. You know, it's unfortunate again that the Almighty's not capable of writing coherently.
It is kind of wonderful, however, how uncomplex, how simple and direct is the old-fashioned justice system. I mean, for every crime, any crime that you might possibly commit, from shoplifting to adultery to murder, whatever, there was only one penalty: death.
Death, yes. Well, Pence says, quote, to see major news organizations attacking Christian education is deeply offensive to us. We'll let the critics roll off our back, but this criticism of Christian education in America should stop.
Change the word Christian to Nazi and see how well that statement.
Or Muslim.
Or Muslim.
Right? How does his boss feel about Muslims? Why doesn't he want them in the country?
Yeah.
Right? Because he believes in freedom? You got to be kidding. Emmanuel Christian School lays out its rules in a parent agreement, which demands that parents embrace a healthy marriage between one man and one woman. So again, it goes back to fear. What is it that Christians fear about two women getting married or two men getting married? Right? It certainly it has potentially unknown consequences in the society, but when we stop and think about it, what are those consequences? What difference does it make? How does it affect your life or mine?
And isn't shunning various kinds of people the exact opposite of what Jesus did and what Jesus taught? I mean, he hung out with prostitutes, known open prostitutes,
lepers,
ex-prostitutes, lepers, tax collectors.
Tax collectors. That's really
various unemployed, unsavory people of all descriptions. And why would you want to just preach to the choir? If you have a message to save people's lives and save their eternal lives, wouldn't you be out there taking that message to them at every opportunity? So if we follow the teachings of Jesus, we want to associate with LGBTQ, whatever's
question mark
as much as possible, because we want the opportunity to convert them to the truth.
Which, of course, was Pence's big deal as governor of Indiana, the conversion therapy.
Yeah, right.
Claiming that somehow we have the ability to make that decision freely. At what point did you decide to become a heterosexual male, Joe.
Well,
what day did you make that decision?
Well,
I've
you're
been-
assuming, of course,
I've
that
been
he is.
openly heterosexual since I was very young. I can tell you that. But I did see where one of the leading head honchos in the conversion therapy business has come out as gay in the last few days.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, you can't make this stuff up.
It's true. It's true.
Here's another thing about the school. It believes that, quote, a wife is commanded to submit to her husband, unquote. So you can see what they're going to be doing for the Equal Rights Amendment in this country when they educate these kids that women are subservient.
What does she submit? Her invoices? Or?
Her brain.
Right.
But it is interesting. This is a 3,000. This goes back thousands of years, 5,000 years ago, when this arrangement of the relationship between men and women, between husband and wife, was such that a wife was a virtual slave to her husband.
Property,
And,
literally property.
Yeah, and it's trying to put this up against 3,000 years that have elapsed since then, amidst the rushing waters of social change, is an impossible task. Women won't stand for it. So we move on from there.
Well, that's not all. Virginia, which apparently is where the school is located, allows private employers to discriminate on the basis of sexual identity. So Virginia is a state that's still functioning in the dark ages.
The Supreme Court just came down in support of that idea
Sure.
a couple of days ago, saying that adoption facilities could limit the type of people that they might send out children for foster care or adoption.
So as the courts tilt more consistently to the right, those are the kinds of decisions we're
I
going
don't
to
see
see.
much difference between what the court ruled on it and this idea. If you can do one, you can do the other.
It's going to be more discrimination against minorities and women.
Won't be long until you won't be able to eat here, let alone buy a piece of cake.
This is kind of a side note, but we're seeing more and more elements of the justice system, judges in particular, being appointed by Trump and being appointed even in Florida here, as we have the most conservative Supreme Court we've ever had, thanks to our governor's recent selection. And so we're going to have to be fighting many battles over and over again. It's something we all need to be prepared to do.
Sure, but with the court stacked, right?
It looks pretty grim, particularly when you look at history and you see that all of the major steps forward in terms of the advances of social services and the expansion of rights,
civil liberties and civil rights
come from the courts, not from the legislature. If we were waiting on the legislature, we'd still have segregated schools. There'd be no abortion. We'd all be praying every morning.
Oh, now, when Lyndon Johnson signed the Voter Rights Act, was that challenged? Did that need to be upheld by the Supreme Court?
I'm sure it was.
I don't recall it.
That, saying I'm sure it was sounds like, I think so.
Yeah, it does.
So you're not sure.
Because at that time, it was extremely,
once it was
extremely
passed,
controversial.
Once it was passed, I think he signed it, and states did whatever they can and still do to ignore it,
that's what I mean.
or whatever. Yeah. But the Johnson, I think, put it quite accurately when he says, "Well, we can kiss the South goodbye for a generation," and that's certainly true.
Right.
Well, let's talk about this vice president. And here's what we opened the show with about the concept of fear being the primary attraction to religion. In a 2006 speech, he warned that gay marriage would lead to social collapse. Here's what he said. Tolerance does not require that we permit our courts to redefine an institution upon which our society depends. Marriage matters. According to the researchers, Harvard sociologist Pitram Sokran found that throughout history, societal collapse was always brought about following an advent of the deterioration of marriage and family, unquote. Now, when he was the governor of Indiana, he signed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Critics say the law allows businesses to discriminate against the LGBTQ community. His beliefs make him a frequent target of pro-LGBTQ protesters. Prior to the presidential inauguration, activists hosted a dance party outside his residence. Apparently not too thrilled with that. But again, that, he sees, and I think he really believes this, right? This isn't just to get votes. He really thinks that our whole society can collapse if we allow people the freedom to marry whomever they love.
But he doesn't specify how that's to be done. Moreover, I think that
what's to be done?
How the collapse of the families.
Well, he expects you to go out and do a vast study of history.
Yeah,
to look up the examples that he never cites of societies disintegrating because of the collapse of morals. And generally, that was an argument, and still is, that many religious people have used about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. That it was more morality than it was politics. And
exactly, and that's not true.
It was politics.
It was, and it was also threats from external military.
They overreached their boundaries, right?
And moreover, if you look back, not just on the Roman Empire, but of all empires, all societies, all civilizations that have collapsed in the past. Most of the evidence for their collapse is related to other factors. The domestic arrangements were not one of the things.
The Peloponnesian Wars were the end of Greece. It had nothing to do with the Greek sexual proclivities one way or another.
And along with that, the Aztec and other Central American empires fell.
Were diseased
not because of,
death.
because of disease, but because of lack of food, because they hadn't planned for the distribution of agricultural products and many other things, along with the Spanish invasion, of course. So there's lots of different reasons why these things happen, but it's just factually wrong.
The only example you could actually point to would be Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a myth.
Myths are handy that way. They can make many points.
Forgetting not that Lot's wife was turned into a condiment. That ought to scare you.
Yes. Pepper, wasn't it?
But of course, and then that fear projects the power of those who say, I'm going to protect you from this, right? And that's how we end up with the atrocious government that we have
I'll
today.
not only protect you, I'll make things better on top of that. I've got an in with the Almighty, and when I make prayer requests and ask for his blessings to be bestowed on whomever, you can look forward to a check in the mail real soon.
In other words, it's the con man effect. I believe we have an outstanding example of one of those going on right now.
We indeed. You're listening to the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We'd love to hear from you. 441-3000 is the phone number. Call in and give us the benefit of your opinion. We're going to take just a moment to tell you about a local atheist organization, and we're going to continue with the most interesting program on the Tan Talk Radio Network here at 2:30.
He said modestly.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Joe Reinhardt has our quote for today. It comes from the 43rd President of the United States, a man unqualified to be the men's room attendant at the White House, curiously serving 2 terms. Clearly the dumbest person ever to walk into the White House.
Until possibly the present occupant. I never thought I'd say this, but I miss George W. I miss him because he said things like, unfairly, but truthfully, our party has been tagged as being against things, anti-immigrant, for example. And we're not a party of anti-immigrants. Quite the opposite. We're a party that welcomes people. That's George Bush in the year 2000. I hope he goes down and takes a look at the wall to be that will never be.
It's because he thought it was a keg party, Joe. He just was a little bit confused. Just wasn't the brightest bulb in the tree.
Although he seems like a paragon of enlightenment compared to our present situation.
Virtual Alfred Einstein compared to
Alfred Einstein.
Well, Atheists of Florida loves to speak out. We sent a letter to the Tampa Bay Times about the statute on religious freedom. January 16th celebrated the anniversary of the 1786 Virginia statute on religious freedom. And here we were just talking about Virginia that now engages in religious discrimination legally, right? Legalized.
They never give up.
This is because the basis of our First Amendment to the Constitution. It's important for us to recognize that religious freedom has been and continues to be an important part of America's historical roots. From their knowledge of histories, our founders knew what it meant to be ruled by a government that had an official religion, and they soundly rejected that for the United States. I don't care what they say on Fox Fake News. Country is simply not a Christian nation and never was. Well, Jefferson was adamant in his defense of religious freedom, which he regarded as the base of individual freedom, stating, quote, "No man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, and that no man should suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief," unquote. The author of this letter is the vice chair of Atheists of Florida, who said, "As an atheist, I adamantly defend the right of people to hold any religious views they wish, if it's not forced on others. A secular government protects everyone's freedom because thought is the foundation of choice. Freedom of religion requires that freedom from religion also be protected." Well, we got a response to that in our mailbox.
And the response,
anonymously sent.
Anonymously, I think. I'll just read the second half of it because it's the part that's pertinent. It says, "I am sincere in asking you, which of us has more to lose? For lack of a better term, if you are right and there is no God, we both die and cease to exist. Poof, gone. Nothing follows. Should there be a God, who has more to lose? Just asking, and as a thoughtful person, I trust you have considered my questions." Well, writer, it's not necessary to be a thoughtful person to consider your questions, because this is a question that was around for centuries, but it was most, I think, accurately posed by Blaise Pascal, who was a 17th century mathematician who made the same argument. If I die and there's no God, I'm just dead like everyone else. But if there is, then I can be rewarded forever or punished forever. In fact, it's called Pascal's wager. So I say you don't have to be thoughtful to rebut your question, because Pascal's wager has been rebutted for the better part of 3 or 4 centuries. In fact, there are millions of gods. What if you happen to pick the wrong one? Well, then you're certainly no better off. In fact, you're probably worse off, because you've made millions of other gods, or you've made the correct God very unhappy that you've been paying attention to the wrong God, which is a violation of the first commandment. Secondly, look at the time and effort and money that you've spent blathering to the unknown when you could have spent it more productively. If nothing else, you could have gone out and helped clean up a highway or something of that nature.
Joe, we have a caller.
Okay. One more thing on Pascal's wager, and that is, if there is a deity and he is omnipotent as described, then he would know that you were lying. Now, I don't know about gods specifically, but I do think that a liar is worse than a person who tells the truth, even if I disagree with the person who tells the truth. And I assume that there's a darker place in hell for a hypocrite than there is for an atheist. All right, we have a caller.
There's something in the commandments about bearing false witness.
There is.
That's the part our president never read. Thanks for calling. Thanks for checking into the Atheist Forum. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, my name is Duncan. My question for you: I'm a Christian theist. Since you lack belief in God as the ground of all being, where God would be the foundation and basis for all rationality and intelligibility, since you lack belief in God, what then would be the ground of all being, or that which is absolute, that provides you with a basis for any intelligibility at all?
Well, the ground of all being is a pretty murky sort of concept, I should think, and not one which is clearly evident when you consider our experience of the universe. There is, you would have to get into a considerable theological discussion or a philosophical discussion with someone like Sartre to come up with an adequate means of conveying the sense of what you mean by ground of all being. Especially,
do you have such a conception?
No, I don't think so. No,
yeah, I'm not clear on exactly
Okay,
what
so
ground of all
it can
being
be murky. Yeah,
is. That something like a creator, or please explain that term a little bit, Duncan,
well,
please.
the ground of all being is whatever is absolute that provides for all contingencies.
Mm-hmm.
So when you as atheists make certain assertions about contingent relationships, they're going to be contingent ultimately on something that is absolute. That absolute, whatever it is, will either be personal or impersonal. If the absolute is personal, that's what we would call God. But since you lack belief in God, you must believe that there is an impersonal absolute that provides for all.
No, I believe that there's no such thing as absolutes. I believe that change is the only constant. And the one truth is that, and in time, all things, this too shall pass. Okay.
Right. If you don't believe in any absolutes, then why does the word green mean the same thing now than it did last week? Do you believe that there are laws of nature, sir?
I believe in making a fair analogy, of which comparing the color green to the idea of an absolute deity is not a fair comparison. Do you believe there are laws of nature?
Do you believe there are laws of nature?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I think we can all agree that if you want to go to a conception as the ground of all being, then the most obvious ground of all being is the universe itself. But the universe is continuously changing over time.
You're not addressing my question. You're talking around it. Now,
no, well, I'm giving.
Ask you, if you say there are no absolutes, then how do you assert that there are even laws of nature if there are no absolutes? You believe in laws of nature, don't you?
There are regularities and consistencies that are clearly observable.
What secures that there are laws of nature? What secures ultimately that there are laws of nature? Do they exist absolutely in and of themselves?
Oh, that's a good question. But
it is a good question, and it's not necessary for me to know the answer to that question in order to know that the evidence concerning a supreme being is non-existent.
Okay, good.
That I do know.
Okay,
it's a human invention.
I have a question.
I don't pretend to be a astrophysicist or a biological scientist or any of those things of that nature. So whether or not I know the answer to the question has nothing to do with the underlying facts.
Okay, so you say there's no evidence for God. Now, evidence entails causal relations and connections. Do you agree with that? I'm sure you would, right? Evidence entails causal relations and connections. So when you say there's no evidence for God, then the sun, the moon, and the stars don't have a causal relation to God as the causal origin.
That only moves our ignorance back.
Can I finish my question?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, since you deny that the sun, the moon, and the stars don't have a causal relation with God, i.e. evidence, can you tell me what is the causal origin of everything that begins then, if it is not God?
No, I can't, and neither can you.
Okay, if you don't know what the causal origin is, can you tell me how did you rule God out, sir?
I just said a moment ago, I looked at the evidence and I found it to be less than adequate to support the proposition.
Right. You're restating the same claim. That's a circular response. If you say there's no evidence, you're stating that nothing has its causal origin in God. And since you don't know what the causal origin is of everything that begins.
And neither does anyone else.
Okay, all right, fine. But you need to focus on my question, please. Right? If you don't know what the causal origin is, how did you rule God out? Stating that there's no evidence is just simply restating the same claim.
Well, I think
how did
that
you rule God out?
We actually know the origin of God. God originated with human civilization. Before there were humans, there was no God.
You're speculating.
No, it's not speculation. It's pretty clear.
Question
if you
for
look
Duncan.
through the record of
so that doesn't rule God out.
No, it doesn't. Duncan, you know the answer to your own question, and I will tell you why. there are literally millions of gods. We'll say thousands. You'll agree with me on that?
Right. But
well, how did you rule out? How did you rule out all of them? Again? How did you rule out all of them except the one that you believe in?
How did I?
And when you answer that question, all you have to do is answer it one more time, and you know how I arrived at the same conclusion.
No, sir. That's what you're giving me is an atheist cliche and slogan, which is
that's because it's true.
One more. Can I finish? Can I finish, please?
Have you? You haven't ever finished? Go ahead.
No, I asked a question, and then you guys.
I'm sorry. You asked me a question. I tried to answer it.
Keep going. Keep going.
Right. You did give me a response, and I appreciate that.
Great.
But the response was not germane to my question. Right now. Since you asserted that nothing has a causal relation to God as the causal origin, but you don't know what the causal origin is, how did you rule out God? Do you have a defeater for the existence of a creator God?
I just said the same thing. I'll say the same thing. There are thousands of gods. You've ruled all of them out. Why don't you answer the question yourself? How did you manage to rule out those thousands of gods?
It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I think.
Well, if it doesn't matter what you say, then why should I even listen to you?
Well, first of all, I'll repeat the question again.
Fine.
Your response is to offer an atheist slogan and cliche. Now, the question I asked you, since you have ruled God out as the causal origin of everything that begins, and you do not know what the causal origin is of everything that begins, do you have a defeater for the existence of God? Telling me, appealing to what I think is not an answer to the question.
Now, when you say
do you have,
defeater,
let me finish. I'm almost done.
Question.
Do you have a defeater for the existence of God?
By defeater, what do you mean? Yeah.
Okay, that God does not exist because of X, Y, Z. Do you have a logical defeater for the existence of God?
I never said God does not exist. I have never said that. What I said was that the evidence of the existence of God doesn't exist.
Right. Now,
that's the defeater, okay? And it's the same defeater you use. Why do you keep asking me such an obvious question?
Do you understand that when you say that there's no evidence for God, it is the same thing as saying that nothing has its causal origin as in God? Okay, that's the same thing.
No, it's not.
How did you? Okay, yeah, it is. Let me explain to you why it is. Evidence has to do with causal relations and connections between events.
Duncan,
if you say there's no evidence for God, let me finish, please.
No, I'm not going to let you finish because I'm not going to sit here and listen to a sermon. I'm not here to be lectured.
I'm pointing out your mistake.
No, you're not.
It's not a lecture. I'm simply correcting your mistake, and you don't like it.
Well, if you can do it briefly,
I'll there's no evidence for God. If you say there's no evidence for God, then what you are saying is nothing has a causal relation or connection to God as the causal origin. Now, I asked you, do you know what the causal origin is of everything that begins? And you said, no, you don't. Then how do you know that God is not the causal origin then?
Well, ignorance in this case, like the ignorance of the origin of the universe itself, it does not necessarily mean that you can fill in that space with God. As I was saying before,
that's not answering my question, sir.
Well, maybe not, but however, we're trying to give you an example of what is, after all, a cultural artifact, the notion of God, and how you came by that.
You're not answering my question.
It is anchored in the past. It's anchored in human history and human understanding. All evidences of God, all churches, all religions, all artwork and everything that has to do with it is anchored in time and anchored in human civilization and history. And you would have to admit that, well, I'm not sure that your question could be answered.
If you state that there's no evidence for God, it is the same as saying nothing has its causal origin or causal relation to God. It's the same statement. Now, since you have ruled God out and you don't know what the causal origin is of everything that begins, how did you rule God out? Do you have a logical defeater for the existence of God?
I think I've tried to answer that several times, but let me ask you this. Why don't you give us the evidence of the causal relationship? If it's so easily discerned, why don't you just prove it to us right now?
I'm still waiting for an answer to my question. You stated there's no evidence for God,
and I've answered it. I've answered it 3 or 4 different times. I'm sorry that you didn't like the answer. Okay.
Yeah, we actually have.
It has nothing to do. It had nothing to do with me not liking it, sir.
We actually have Duncan.
Your response was not germane to my question.
That's true, but Duncan, we've got another caller, and maybe he knows the answer to your question.
It could be.
Let's find out.
But before you go, Duncan, would you like a get out of hell free card? If you would,
let it know if you could still answer my question. You said that there's no.
Apparently, I can't. I've tried several
can't.
times, and you said I haven't. So
no, you just keep on over talking me. Is what you do.
Well, let's give the other caller.
Thanks, Duncan. Call us again. Bye bye.
Thanks anyway.
You're right. So you can't answer my question, so you dump me as a caller.
Well,
again, try again later.
12 minutes.
Why don't you call us back with the proof? Okay.
No, sir. I'm waiting for an answer. You haven't answered my question. The question is, do you have a logical defeater for God? Because if you don't, you can't stipulate that there's no evidence.
So your argument is, if we can't disprove the God, it exists, and that's not a viable argument, because you've got.
I didn't make an argument to you. I didn't make an argument to you.
But that's the assertion of your question.
I didn't make an argument to you. I'm simply evaluating your claim that there's no evidence for God, and the only way that you can make that statement is you either have to determine what is the causal origin of everything that begins. I'm
ready to listen to the evidence. I don't have any.
Please,
I'm ready to hear it.
Please, may I finish? Okay. Now, when you state, I'd like to finish my point. If you assert that there's no evidence for God, you are asserting that nothing has its causal origin in God.
All right, I've heard that 10 times.
We've been around.
Right. Now,
let's go ahead.
Now, if you're going to assert that, then you're going to have to either tell me what the causal origin of everything is, or offer a logical defeater for God. But you have done neither, gentlemen.
Okay. Well, let's go on, and we'll see what another call. Here we go. All right. Hello, caller.
Yes.
Okay, we're ready. Perhaps you have the answer to some question.
Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I have a question for the guest or guests.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Do you believe in Lucifer, or do you worship Lucifer, rather?
No, of course not.
No.
That would be silly.
No.
Okay.
But we do offer get out of hell free. Oh, darn it. We lost him.
We did. The point is no, that's a good question, in the sense that a lot of people think that just because you don't worship a deity, that you must worship some sort of devil. And the answer is that we don't worship anything. Okay. In fact, there is nothing, I think, to be admired about groveling at the feet of any supreme being, imagined or otherwise. So no, we don't worship Lucifer. We don't worship God. We don't hate God. We don't hate the Easter Bunny. Okay, cool.
Well, I don't like the Easter Bunny particularly.
Well, he brings all those fattening foods, but
that's true. Too many.
But no, I mean, that caller expressed what a lot of people think about atheists. If we don't subscribe to the Christian God, then we must alternatively subscribe to the devil or some other deity, supreme being or supernatural being in its place. No, we reject all of them for the same reason. There's the same amount of evidence for any of them as there is for the existence of Tinkerbell.
I do want to say this about our first caller, and that is, I still don't understand his question.
Well, it's one of those kinds of questions which is basically unanswerable because of the way it is constructed. It's like, can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it? How do you answer that? I mean, there is an answer for it, I'm sure, but it's one of those structures.
Sure, but you can't answer it until you define the God, right?
Well, that's true.
But that's what Christianity.
The point is, why would you even need to ask that question? Unless you believe in every God that ever existed, you know why the evidence for certain deities and certain religions is just not adequate. You already know the answer to that question, and you know it 100,000 times over.
All the gods are different. Yeah. They all have different capabilities and different origin stories. And
they all have a lot, but they have a lot of things in common as well, of course. And
some things,
they can mess up your life if you don't treat them right.
But Jim and Joe, don't you think that really the caller's question boils down to one thing? You can't disprove the existence of the God.
Therefore, it must exist.
But yet we know that the universe exists. We're living in it.
That's right.
And so he's attributing the cause to the God and saying, unless you can demonstrate otherwise, you've got no argument to reject the God.
And even if you admit the existence of a deity, all that does is move our ignorance on the subject back one more level, because you still can't answer the question of where did God come from.
It's
if he had to have a cause and some
Right.
causal relationship between.
It's like as I pointed out to him, the question of where did the universe come from, and many people, in the absence of a concrete answer, say, well, God did that. And it's in all science, wherever you have a question, wherever there was something not known, we just insert God into that point. The gods, exactly. But that's why God's place has been diminishing for hundreds of years now.
Plus, I generally tried to answer the man's question, and if he didn't find the answer satisfactory or adequate or whatever, I can't really help that. That is the answer. I'm not going to change it. So,
well, you're listening
call again, Duncan. Enjoyed talking with you.
You're listening to Christian Love Today on the Tan Talk. No, wait a minute.
No,
this is the Atheist Forum. I'm sorry, I got mixed up.
How'd
that happen?
There you go.
Now I remember. As if it were yesterday.
Yes. A Louisiana public school system agreed to restrict promotion of religion to settle a lawsuit alleging that some teachers, coaches, and school officials tried to coerce students into Christian activities in classes, graduation ceremonies, and athletic contests. This is typical of the kind of issues that I should say, that gets our attention as atheists. When public officials, whether they're educators or government officials, try to use their position of power to impose their particular brand of Christianity upon all of us, because we end up going to school because of truancy laws.
Yeah. And because they can.
And because you have to. Right, exactly.
But this you mean by the Christian mandate,
but this isn't a question so much about religion. It's a question about equality, about equal treatment under the law. My children should not have to go to a public school, or anyone's children, where they're required to be there and participate in religious activities, regardless of their beliefs. And in the diverse society, and becoming more diverse by the moment that we live in, that's becoming more and more true. And so it discriminates against every people of other faiths, little or no faiths, and even people of the same faith, because even within Christianity, there's something well over 30,000 different denominations. Yes. So they might not be praying in the manner that is prescribed by their particular denomination.
Things are constantly changing.
So it has no place in any public institution. Thank you for the First Amendment.
And that's what people tend to forget, is that for over 225 years now, the American Republic has tried and fought its way into reaching the level of personal freedom that we all enjoy now. But some people just won't seem to accept this for some reason, and they insist that something that they themselves strongly hold to and believe, whether it be simply a belief in God, or a belief in a specific God of a specific denomination, but that they want to see become the main pillar of the community, it just isn't going to work. That much experience of civil life should have taught us that. And the fact that many people still don't understand or appreciate it suggests that our understanding of history is not adequately taught. That's what needs to be in the schools: history and philosophy, thinking about issues and how they're built, how they're constructed, how arguments are made. All of these kinds of things are skills and knowledge which can be transferred by the schools, and that's what we ought to be doing. Yes.
Logic ought to be required in grade school. The ability to look at a truth table, to look at a syllogism, to weigh the truth or the sophistry of a statement is a skill that's sorely lacking in so many people.
Exactly.
Look at the advertising industry. You'd like to see some examples of that.
Yeah.
Better yet, don't.
But, you know, the thing is, we've had the courts to protect us from rogue teachers or government officials who want to, teach us the false notion that this is a Christian nation. It was founded as a Christian nation, and that our liberties, our democratic process, our Constitution, our Republican form of government all came from Christianity, which is a total falsehood. Nothing could be further from the truth. When those systems existed through Western Europe, they were kingdoms, because that's what's advocated by Christianity. But the problem we have now is that with the courts being packed with conservative judges, there's going to be far too many of them that think the Bible is really the foundation of our law and not the Constitution. We know Clarence Thomas is a good example of somebody who would think that way. So, it really threatens the Republic to load up our courts with conservative judges who are going to be repressive toward the civil liberties and rights of women and minorities.
It's important.
It's vital.
Yeah, it's important to remind them.
That's the most dangerous thing about the whole religious right and conservative movement. It is the antithesis of what our civil liberties are all about, as defined in the Constitution.
It is somewhat ironic that the chief defenders of the civil liberty of religion would be atheists, because throughout the world and throughout time, in places like the USSR and in Nazi Germany, in places where various religions were severely repressed, you will find atheists standing up for the rights of everybody to express their own religious beliefs, because nobody can be free if people are not able to talk about what they believe, what they think, no matter how ridiculous it might be. But it's theirs, it's their right, and that's the important thing that makes a difference in terms of how atheists interact with the rest of the human community.
If you can't speak your mind without fear of retribution, what you end up with is a society of liars.
Well, it's the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Visit our website at Atheists of Florida .org. We want to say to our caller, Duncan, we hate the religion. We love the religionist.
Yes, that goes for you, Duncan. We like you.
We're not running away. Run away, run away.
Absolutely not. Anyway, we'll be back next Friday, 2 o'clock here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Tell your friends, tell your worst enemies about the Atheist Forum. Hope you'll join us next week. And now, along with Joe Reinhardt and Jim Peterson, Ed Golly reminding you that if the story seems just a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.
WTAN, Clearwater,
FM 106.1,
WDCF, Dade City, Tampa Bay, WZHR, Zephyr Hills,
FM 104.3.
Listen.
Special report shutdown breakthrough.
The longest shutdown in American history will finally end today.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer speaking moments after President Trump announced a deal to end the 35-day partial government shutdown for at least 3 weeks.
I am asking Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to put this proposal